Hey everyone, so in this video I want to talk a bit more about Kazuha and go over whether you should build him as a support or a main DPS. Now I did briefly go over this in my last video, however this is a big topic and so wanted to make a separate video discussing this. Now firstly, to address the obvious, you can build him either as a main DPS or as a support, just like pretty much any other character in Genshin. That's why you see so many videos on YouTube about main DPS Barbara or main DPS Sucrose. As long as you have the weapons and artifacts, you can definitely build the character any way you want to. However, obviously, certain characters are definitely more suited to different roles in the party depending on their abilities and overall kit, and that is what I want to talk about today. So Kazuha, if we take a look at his abilities, we can clearly see that he is first and foremost intended as a support, but not a typical support like Barbara who heals your party, or like Diona who shields and heals your party. More of a bursty support who you switch to use his abilities and switch back to your main DPS. Firstly, his elemental skill is somewhat reminiscent of a mix between Venti's and Xiao's skill, in that it propels you upwards and then you can plunge down, dealing anemo damage and pulling enemies towards you. This seems really good, as if you aren't running someone like Venti who is able to easily group the enemies together, then having someone like this is really nice, especially for main DPSs whose positioning is important. Think characters like Xiao, who really needs the enemies to be grouped up in order to deal a good amount of damage with his burst. Also to note is Kazuha's third passive, in that upon triggering a swirl reaction, Kazuha will grant teammates a small percentage increase of elemental damage for every point of elemental mastery Kazuha possesses, which tells us a few things. Firstly is that elemental mastery, at least for support Kazuha, is one of the main stats that you want to be building, as the more elemental mastery you get, the harder the swirl reaction of your main DPS will hit. Secondly, as this passive gets activated, when you trigger a swirl reaction, it means that you probably want to be running a character that is not a Nemo as your main DPS in order to proc this passive and deal a good amount of damage. Also to remember is that if you have the Veritas and Venera, which is the Nemo set that you should be running on all your Nemo supports, as it is crazy good, definitely one of the best artifact sets right now. And Kazuha, because of that passive, and because it looks like you want to be triggering swirl often, this set will be amazing on him. The last thing I want to touch on regarding building him as a support is one of the constellations, the second one to be exact, which increases the current active character's elemental mastery by 200 if they are in the zone of his elemental burst, which again will help your main DPS do tons of damage with their reactions, and again helps him as a great anemo support. But now let's move on to building him as a main DPS. Firstly, his skill, which can deal plunging attack damage. Now if we know anything about plunging attacks, we know that they have often some of the highest damage modifiers in terms of basic attack skill, and is a big reason why the whole Dragon Strike with Diluc started, due to his insane plunging attack modifier. And also Zhao, who will, in his burst, you pretty much only want to be plunging attacking due to the amount of damage it can do. So if Kazuha can get these plunge attacks off often, then he should be in a good spot damage wise. And also if we take a look at his first constellation, which decreases the cooldown of the skill, and when he uses his burst it will completely reset the cooldown of the skill, then it does look like he'll be able to plunge attack relatively often. Now if we move over to his burst, this is an ability that does a good amount of damage upfront and will create a zone in which will periodically deal damage to the enemies inside of it. So while it seems to be a burst that is there to trigger reactions and such, definitely could end up dealing huge amounts of damage. And I mean, wouldn't that be awesome, especially the animation of it and seeing a huge crit number after that. But even after all of that, if the damage for the skill and burst is not that good, then us people who want to be running him as a main DPS have one last thing, and that is his Constellation 6. Now personally, I don't think I'll be able to get him to C6, as I definitely don't have that sort of money. But yeah, this constellation reads that for 5 seconds after using its skill or burst, will gain a Nemo infusion, which will increase his damage dealt by his attacks by 0.2% for every point of elemental mastery. Now, this constellation is definitely for people who want to play him as a bit more of a main DPS role, and depending on if you can keep this Anemo infusion up and have a bit of elemental mastery, then you hopefully should see some great numbers come out of this constellation. But once again, unless you're a super big whale, you probably won't be hitting this constellation, at least for a while to come. And so, now the question is, support or main DPS? Well, the choice is yours. Personally, I'll be building him as a main DPS, as I think seeing him deal huge amounts of damage with his burst will be ultra satisfying. And the fact that his overall aesthetic is really cool, I don't mind pulling my resources into him. And while he is definitely more suited towards being a support, I'm sure the Genshin community and myself will find a way to make him work as a main DPS. And so, I hope you enjoyed, and see you next time.